So I built a square bot, and that's a robot that uses Vex robotics parts, motors, gears, that type of thing. And it's a square. And I built it with a gearing set so that there's two motors. Each motor drives a 36 tooth gear, and then those in turn drive two 60 tooth gears, giving this thing a higher torque value than speed. I also did this because the course we had has a steep angled grade that it climbs up and down. It's got a nice bump in the middle, and with the 60 gear tooth in the middle, it bottoms out and gets stuck. That's why I made that design choice. Right. I built the robot with a wider frame initially because that's what the pieces I had on hand. However, on my first test, I noticed that I needed to get the frame smaller because I kept bumping into the sides of our course and actually pushing some of the pieces as it turned or would, get too close to one side or the other. So I made these adjustments, and the robot worked well. It worked well on the timers. Working the timers was a little difficult, but required just tweaking and testing and tweaking and testing. So initially I had it, so I'd have 90-degree turns to the left and right, and those worked fairly well. But getting it to go the proper distance forward and backward took a little bit of trial and error, which wasn't too bad, but it was easy enough to do. Making the LCD display the direction the robot was going took some time. Initially I started by just making the timers work, making the motors spin in time, and then I layered the LCD display on top of that in order to get things to work properly. So it's one step on top of the other, on top of the other, one layer at a time, as not to overload myself, because coding is not my strong suit. So I got the LCD display to work and took a little bit of trial and error again, but that wasn't too bad. So the first section of this project, operating on timers, I had little to no issue on once I got over the first go of just making the motors spin. In the second part of our assignment, we had to make the robot operate autonomously. We used a bump switch on the front of the robot that, as it would bump into the walls, I would create a signal which would derive feedback to the robot, and the robot would adjust using some logic to reorient itself through this path. I had quite a difficult time with this. I had quite a difficult time getting the signals to work. I tried to put a counter into my code in order to make the count, so it would be at count 0, it would drive straight, and as the number of counts increased, it would determine whether to turn right or to turn left or to stop. And I had so much difficulty with this. It was the hardest part of this whole project, and I was unable to complete the project to this point. I wasn't able to run through the maze using a bump switch as feedback, as it just was too difficult for me. However, I did write a code, and it contains a lot of the same elements as the code for the timers, but getting that counter to work and getting it to play nicely with the if and else statements was quite the challenge. Building a robot was not a challenge. Operating it on the first objective was not, but making it work all together with the bump switch I found very difficult.